G'day and welcome to the world of bonsai. In today's episode we have a lignan mountain bonsai, the creation of a Chinese elm from an old stump. As well as that, there's a resurrection of a fig and fig propagation, as well as a memorial bushfire gum tree bonsai. And we begin with Lu Wei, Lingnan Punjing Master.
嗱，呢一盤嘅樹種咧就係湖北省嘅對節白蠟。咁呢一個樹形咧喺我哋嶺南盆景咧，亦都係一種比較有代表性嘅樹形。我哋叫佢做石上林形。點解叫佢石上林形咧？係因為呢個樹胚啊，呢個樹胚咧，佢本身就係一個山形。嗱，呢度係山嘅主峰、副峰啊。佢整個樹胚嘅基礎咧，就係一座大山。咁然後喺呢個山形上邊咧，就安排呢啲樹咧，就等於嗰啲樹啊喺山上邊長出嚟嘅樹。嗱，呢啲懸崖啊、直樹啊、仲有啲斜樹啊。咁佢每一個大山裏邊咧，好多種樹形都有嘅。咁我哋就將佢咧各種樹形咧集中喺一個呢個整個佈局上邊咧，咁啊體現咗咧一個好自然嘅大山上邊嗰啲天然嘅樹木嘅一個表現手法。咁呢一個主要咧，我哋要根據呢個樹胚嘅特點。樹胚嘅特點咧就係佢本身似山形啊。咁如果山形嘅話，就牽涉一個比例問題。因此我哋睇啲樹啊，嗰個樹頭咁大，啲樹都唔係好粗啊，就係因為體現嗰個比例啦。咁高一座山啊，啲樹係咁細棵，就更顯得呢個山好高大。
Next, a Chinese elm created from a stump. Here's an old Chinese elm stump that I dug from the ground about a decade ago. I dispose of the dead wood and clean anything away from the trunk so that I'm back to hard wood. It's important to remove this and expose the green cambium layer. This will enable a callousing around the edge there. Then I need to prune off those long growing shoots up the top and clean off any stumps with my saw. Then clean away the rough cut around the edge with a sharp knife. Next, I place some cut paste over those big cuts to encourage callousing and covering over. I do the same around the base where that big wound is. This will greatly increase the longevity of the tree. Next, I rake around in the root zone trying to find some interesting characteristics down there, and there are plenty. And I pot the tree in a decent sized pot, let it grow, and a few months later there are new shoots everywhere. And then it's the same again. Feed it up, put it out in the sun, water it, and let it grow long again to thicken up the branches and then develop the pads of foliage. There is a bit of a dilemma with Chinese elms in that if you let sacrifice branches grow long, they do invigorate the main stem, but they tend to rob all the energy from the finer branches that you've developed. So this has to be done rather cautiously. Creation of the apex always poses a few questions, and we'll all make our own choices about that. Next, I wanted the lower branches to thicken up, so I allowed those to grow the longest. Then I chop those off and begin pruning to further develop the pads of foliage. Over the warmer growing months, I simply cut the pads like a hedge, and later on, when it's winter and the branches are better exposed, is a great time to do some fine pruning within the framework of the pads. And remember, defoliation is a great way to force out new growth. Of course, by just pruning like a hedge, the pads of foliage can become quite heavy. And then once you get to the cooler months and the leaves start to fall away, this is a great time to get inside and remove any branches that are crossing over or competing with other stems for a certain area of space. So there's a Chinese elm from a stump. And next we take a look at the rejuvenation and recreation of a fig.
Do you have to prune a bonsai? Well, you don't have to, but there are certain benefits to it. Some things are genetic dwarves. They stay small all by themselves. Others, like this Moreton Bay fig, is a giant tree and it grows vigorously. If you don't prune it, look what happens. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And what I want to show you is an option and the choices that I might make if I was restyling this tree. The owner hasn't pruned it, yet they've been a diligent waterer. They've watered it really thoroughly to the point that the pot here has actually broken away. It's cracked in two and they've tied some rope around to hold it together. So that's how strong the root system is, but now it's time to give the tree a good hard prune and see what we can make of it.
Trees that have new shoots originating from old wood are always going to bounce back readily from a hard pruning, and the aerial roots are a pretty good sign that the tree wants to grow. I begin by cutting off all of the unwanted branches. I want to retain this tree as a single trunk tree. And of course figs are rubber trees, and when you cut them they bleed their latex readily, and a great way to stop the bleeding is to simply spray the wounds with cold water. This instantly seals off the wound. Then it's time to rake out the roots and give them a good prune.
And a handy little benefit of doing something like this is that with the offcuts, where there's roots originating from them, that's a started cutting. It's already got roots on it.
And something not to be wasted. So after I repot the tree, I take those cuttings and simply poke them in a bit of potting mix, and in no time new shoots are emerging everywhere. Not only on the cuttings but also on the main tree, and they soon elongate and may be ready for wiring. This customer doesn't want the tree wired, which is a legitimate choice, but there's the revitalisation of a fig bonsai. Add the World of Bonsai page at Facebook to keep updated about new episodes.
Here in Australia we have a special relationship with eucalypt trees, the gum tree.
And following the Black Saturday bushfires in February of 2009 here in Victoria, Australia, I wanted to plan something that was a reminder to me of the horrific events of that day, and something that in the future would continue to remind me of those. I had these river red gums that had been sitting around the nursery for a few years, and I wanted to do something with those that was evocative of what happens to the Australian bush after a bushfire. I stripped the gums of all their foliage and raked the roots out so they could be planted into a shallow pot. Then I chose to spray them with black paint to evoke the feeling of the burnt forest. I could have burnt these, but I didn't want to play with fire at this particular time. Then I chose to plant it in a shallow old Australian pot with a little bit of ornamentation to further evoke the horror of that day. And foreboding as the Aussie bush may be after a bushfire, it doesn't take long before the eucalypts begin to shoot forth with new buds. And before long these new buds shoot forth into luxuriant green foliage. A reminder of the hope for the future and the possibility for re-emergence and rebirthing. As these shoots elongate, I pinch away the tips, and this causes them to thicken up and densify the pads of foliage. Then, as the foliage matures, it hardens into a more sober tone to remind us of our tenuous relationship with this Aussie icon.